I went camping alone because I wanted quiet, not adventure. I picked a random spot from a forest map I found online, far from official campgrounds. It looked simple enough: a dirt road, a short hike, a small clearing near a creek. I had done this kind of thing before and nothing bad ever happened. That made me careless. The drive itself already felt off. The road turned from pavement to gravel and then to packed dirt. My car shook the whole way. Trees closed in on both sides, thick and tall, blocking most of the sky. There were no houses, no signs, no fences. Just trees that looked old and heavy, like they had been there longer than anything else around. I lost phone signal about 20 minutes in. I remember noticing it and not caring much. I parked near the end of the road where the trees opened slightly. There was no proper parking area, just a flat spot where tires had clearly stopped before. That should have been my first warning. I grabbed my pack, locked my car, and started walking. The trail was barely a trail, more like a path made by animals and maybe a few people who did not want to be found. The air smelled damp and sharp. Leaves were wet even though it had not rained recently. Every step made noise. Twigs snapped, leaves crunched. I kept thinking about how loud I was. The forest felt too quiet in between my steps, like it was waiting for something. I reached the clearing after about 40 minutes. It was smaller than I expected. Just enough space for a tent and a small fire. The creek ran nearby, slow and dark, with water that barely moved. I set up my tent carefully, making sure it was tight and secure. I laid out my sleeping bag, my flashlight, my knife, and my food. Everything had its place. I like order when I am alone. It makes me feel in control. The sun was already dropping behind the trees, even though it was not late. The forest got dark fast. Shadows stretched and blended together until depth was hard to judge. I collected wood before it got fully dark. While doing that, I noticed something strange. Some of the branches I picked up were already broken cleanly, not snapped naturally. They were stacked in small piles, like someone had gathered them and left them there. I told myself it was from other campers, even though this place was supposed to be rarely used. I ignored the tight feeling in my chest and carried the wood back. I made a small fire and ate a simple meal. The flames helped, but only a little. The light did not travel far. Everything beyond it was black and thick. The sound started after full dark. No animal sounds. Not bugs or birds. It was more like movement. Slow footsteps on leaves, pauses, then movement again, always far enough that I could not see anything. I sat still and listened. I told myself it was deer, or raccoons, or anything, normal. But it did not sound normal. The steps were too steady, too careful. Animals rush and stop suddenly. This felt measured. I turned off my headlamp and just watched the fire. My eyes tried to adjust to the dark, but the trees swallowed everything. The steps stopped at some point. The silence after was worse. My ears rang. My heart felt loud. I kept waiting for the sound to come back, closer this time. It did not. After a long while, I forced myself to crawl into my tent. I zipped it shut slowly, trying not to make noise. I lay on my back, staring at the dark fabric inches from my face. Sleep came in short pieces. Every small sound pulled me awake. The creek. I gave it a fit. Wind, leaves falling, then something different. A soft dragging sound, like fabric or skin brushing against dirt. It moved around the outside of my tent, slow and close. I held my breath. My body felt frozen. The sound stopped near my head. I could feel pressure through the ground, like weight shifting. I waited for hours, or what felt like hours. My muscles hurt from staying tense. Eventually, the sound faded away. When morning came, I barely noticed the light at first. I was exhausted. When I finally unzipped the tent, the clearing looked wrong. My fire pit had been disturbed. Ashes were spread out, like something had stepped through them. One of my shoes, which I had left outside, was gone. I searched around slowly. My shoe was about 20 feet away, placed upright at the edge of the trees. Not thrown, not dragged, placed. That made my stomach drop. I packed up fast, too fast. I skipped breakfast. I just wanted to leave. As I shouldered my pack, I noticed footprints near where my tent had been. They were not animal prints. They were human, barefoot, deep in the soil. I followed the trail back the way I came, but it felt longer. The forest felt tighter.
Every sound made me turn my head. Halfway back, I found something that made me stop completely. One of my tire tracks near the road had been covered with leaves and dirt. Someone had tried to hide it. My car was still there, untouched, but that detail told me everything I needed to know. He drove out fast, my hands shaking on the wheel. I did not stop until I reached pavement and my phone signal returned. I sat in the car for a long time, just breathing. I reported nothing. I told no one at the time. There was nothing I could prove, and I did not want to explain how close I felt to something I could not see. Weeks later, I cleaned my gear at home. While shaking out my tent, something fell from the fabric seam. A small piece of cloth, dark and dirty, like it had been torn from old clothing. It was not mine. I threw the tent away that same day. I do not camp alone anymore.
I still like nature, but only places where other people are nearby. The forest did not feel evil or cursed, it felt watched. That is what stayed with me. Whatever was out there did not rush or attack. It waited, observed, and touched my things to let me know it could. That was enough. I wanted to be away from people, away from noise, away from the feeling that I was always being watched in the city. I picked a public forest area that allowed overnight camping but was far from popular trails. The map showed a dirt access road, a small clearing near a creek, and miles of trees in every direction. I packed light but careful. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, headlamp, extra batteries, knife, phone with low signal, and a small first aid kit. I told myself this was normal preparation and not fear. The drive there already felt wrong. The road got narrower and rougher, and my phone signal dropped to almost nothing. Trees leaned over the road, blocking out the sky. When I parked, there were no other cars, no footprints in the dirt except old tire marks and animal tracks. The air smelled wet and heavy, like rotting leaves and mud. It was late afternoon, and the light was already dull under the trees. I walked my Gia to the clearing. The creek was shallow but fast, making constant noise. I set my tent close enough to hear the water, but far enough to avoid flooding. The ground was uneven, and it took time to level everything. While working, I kept noticing how quiet everything else was. No birds, no insects. Just the water and the wind moving high up in the trees. Every sound felt louder because nothing else filled the space. As it got darker, the forest changed. Shadows stretched long and thick. The temperature dropped fast. I cooked a simple meal and cleaned everything carefully, sealing the food and hanging it away from the tent. I checked the ground again and noticed something that hadn't been there earlier. A set of boot prints near the edge of the clearing. They were not mine. They were deeper and wider, pointing toward the trees, not the road. I tried to explain it away. Maybe someone passed through earlier. Maybe I missed them. I reminded myself this was public land. Still, my chest felt tight. I walked the edge of the clearing and saw the prints fade into leaf cover. No clear trail. Just enough to know someone had been there recently. Night came fast. The darkness in the forest was thick, not like city dark. My headlamp felt weak, like it was cutting a small hole in something solid. I zipped into my tent and lay still, listening. The creek kept running. The wind moved the trees. Then there was another sound. Slow movement through leaves. Note heavy like a deer, not light like a raccoon. Controlled, careful movement. I told myself not to panic. I focused on breathing. The sound stopped. Minutes passed. Then it started again, closer. I turned off my headlamp and stayed still. The sound circled the clearing, never rushing, never stopping long enough to feel safe. I could hear branches bend slightly, then release. Footsteps paused, then continued. At some point, the sound stopped right outside my tent. I could sense the presence through the thin fabric. I could smell something unfamiliar, like sweat and damp clothes. The zipper of my tent did not move. Nothing touched the fabric. Whoever it was stayed still for a long time. Long enough that my body started to shake from holding tension. Eventually, the steps moved away. I waited. I did not sleep. Hours passed in pieces. Sometimes the forest was quiet. Sometimes I heard movement farther out, always slow, always careful. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps again, this time retreating toward the deeper woods.
When light finally came, I felt weak. My muscles hurt from staying tense all night. I waited until the sun was fully up before unzipping the tent. The clearing looked normal, but the ground told a different story. Fresh boot prints circled my tent. They were clear in the damp soil. Whoever had been there walked around slowly, stopping in several places. One set of prints stood close enough that I knew they had been inches from my head. I packed as fast as I could without making mistakes. My hands shook. While breaking down the tent, I noticed something else. A small pile of disturbed leaves near a tree. Under them was a crushed food wrapper that was not mine. It was old, but not too old. Someone had been using this spot. I should have left immediately, but I made a mistake. I told myself it was daylight and I was overreacting. I decided to hike a short trail nearby before leaving, thinking movement would calm me. I packed my main gear into the car but kept water and my knife. I followed a narrow path that ran along the creek. The trail felt wrong almost immediately. The trees were thicker. The light faded again.
After about 20 minutes, I noticed marks on tree trunks. Note trail markers.
Scratches at shoulder height. Some looked accidental, others deliberate. I also noticed the ground had more boot prints, going in different directions, crossing the trail. The creek noise faded as I moved away, and the forest became quiet again. That silence pressed in on my ears. I stopped walking and listened. Leaves shifted somewhere ahead of me, then behind me. Not animals, too slow, too spaced out. I turned around to go back, and that was when I saw the shape between the trees. A person standing still, partially hidden by a trunk. I could not see their face clearly, but I could tell they were watching me. They did not move when I froze, they just stood there. My body reacted before my mind did. I backed away slowly, never turning my back. The figure stayed where it was. After several steps, I turned and ran. The run back felt endless.
Branches scratched my arms.
My breath burned. I expected to hear footsteps chasing me, but instead there was nothing. That silence was worse. When I reached the clearing, I saw something that dropped my stomach. My car door was open. I rushed forward and checked inside. Nothing was stolen, but the glove box was open, and items were moved around. Someone had been inside.
Recently, the realization hit hard. They knew I was here. They knew where I was sleeping. They knew my escape.
I got in the car and started it without hesitation. As I drove down the dirt road, I checked the mirror constantly. About halfway out, I saw a figure standing near the trees, watching the road. They did not move as I passed. They just stood there, calm and patient. I did not stop driving until I reached a town and had full phone signal. I reported what happened to the local authorities. Later, I learned that the area had a history of illegal campers and people living deep in the forest, avoiding contact, sometimes watching visitors for days. No arrests were made. No one was found. I went home and cleaned my gear, but the smell of the forest stayed with me for days. At night, I kept hearing slow footsteps in my mind, careful movement, controlled breathing. I understood then that the scariest part was not what happened, but what could have happened if I stayed one more night. I stopped camping alone after that. Not because the forest is evil, but because some people hide where no one is supposed to look, and they are very good at staying quiet until you are completely alone.
I went camping alone in late October, the kind of time when the trees are already half dead and the air smells like wet leaves and cold dirt. I picked a public forest a few hours from home, nothing extreme, just a place with long trails and a small clearing near a creek where camping was allowed. I wanted quiet. I wanted to be away from phones, lights, and people. I told myself that being alone out there would clear my head. I packed light but careful. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, headlamp, extra batteries, a small knife, and a map printed from the park website. I did not bring a gun. I did not bring a radio. I trusted the place because it was not remote wilderness, just forest. The drive-in already felt wrong. The road narrowed until it turned into gravel, then dirt. Trees leaned close on both sides like they were trying to block the way. There were no other cars when I parked. The sign at the trailhead was old, the paint peeling, the map faded. Leaves covered most of the ground, hiding the dirt path underneath. I locked my car, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the trail. The forest was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. No birds, no wind, just my own footsteps and the soft crunch of leaves. The trail markers were spaced far apart, and I had to stop often to make sure I was still going the right way. After about an hour, I reached the creek. The water was low and slow, dark with fallen leaves. The clearing beside it was smaller than I expected, uneven and damp, but it was the only place marked for camping. I set up my tent anyway. As the afternoon went on, the light started to change. The trees blocked the sun early, and everything took on a gray color. The temperature dropped fast. I gathered wood, filtered water, and cooked a simple meal. I kept noticing how sound carried strangely. A branch breaking somewhere far away sounded close. My own movements felt loud, like I was announcing myself to the forest. I told myself I was just not used to being alone. I reminded myself that fear fills silence when there is nothing else to do. Still, I kept scanning the trees without realizing it, my eyes moving from trunk to trunk, watching the gaps between them. Just before dark, I noticed something that bothered me more than anything else so far. In the soft dirt near the creek, where the ground was not fully covered by leaves, there were footprints. Human footprints. They were not fresh enough to be wet, but they were clear. Boot prints, not hiking shoes. They crossed the clearing and disappeared into the trees on the far side. I tried to tell myself they were old, maybe from another camper days ago, but the edges were sharp. Leaves had not filled them in yet. I did not pack up and leave. I should have. Instead, I told myself that people passed through places like this all the time. I told myself that fear was making it seem bigger than it was. Night came fast. The forest went black in a way that cities never do. My headlamp cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, and everything outside that beam felt close and watching. I crawled into my tent early. The cold seeped up from the ground, and the air smelled like damp fabric and pine. For a while, nothing happened. I lay there listening to the creak and the faint sound of leaves shifting. Then, sometime after midnight, I woke up for no clear reason. The forest was silent. Not even the creek made noise anymore. That kind of silence presses on your ears. I held my breath without meaning to. That was when I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and careful. Not the random scuff of an animal. Not the quick movement of something small. These were steady, spaced out, controlled. They circled the clearing. I could hear leaves crunching, then stopping, then crunching again. Whoever it was stayed just outside the edge of my headlamp beam. I did not move. I did not reach for the zipper. I stayed still and listened. My heart beat so hard I felt it in my throat. The footsteps stopped near the side of my tent. Something shifted the fabric slightly, like a hand brushing against it or a knee pressing into it. The material tightened for a moment and then relaxed. I stared at the thin wall of nylon inches from my face. I could see the shadow of a shape on the other side, darker than the dark around it. The shape moved slowly, like someone leaning down to look. I waited for something else to happen. It did not. After a long time, the pressure eased. The footsteps moved away, slow and deliberate, circling once more before fading into the trees. I did not sleep after that. I sat with my knife in my hand, every muscle tight, listening for any sound. Hours passed. The cold crept in deeper. My fingers went numb. I kept expecting the footsteps to return, but they did not. When the sky finally started to lighten, I packed as fast and as quietly as I could. My hands shook so badly I dropped things. I did not eat. I did not clean up. I shoved everything into my pack and left the clearing without looking back. The forest looked different in daylight, but not safer. The trail seemed narrower. The trees felt closer together. I moved quickly, almost running at times, constantly checking behind me. That was when I noticed the trail markers. Some of them were wrong. A few were turned slightly, pointing just off the main path. At one fork, the marker pointed straight into thicker brush, not along the worn trail. I realized then how easy it would be to get lost if you followed those signs without thinking. I stayed on the path that looked most used, even when the markers disagreed. About 30 minutes from the trailhead, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Another set of footprints, the same boot pattern as before. They were on the trail, fresh, pressed deep into the dirt where the leaves had been kicked aside. They were going in the same direction as me.
The spacing told me they were not old. Whoever made them was walking slowly, not rushing. I stopped. The forest stayed quiet. I waited, listening, but heard nothing. After a few minutes, I started moving again. Faster now, my breath loud in my ears. I never saw anyone. I did not hear footsteps behind me, but the prints stayed ahead of me for a while, appearing and disappearing where the ground allowed them to show. Eventually, they veered off the trail and vanished into the trees.
When I reached the parking area, my car was the only one there. I unlocked it, threw my pack inside, and drove away without stopping. I did not relax until the forest thinned and cell service returned.
A few days later, after I was back home and had slept properly for the first time since the trip, I looked up the forest online. Buried in old local news articles were reports of hikers who had gone missing over the years.
Most were written off as accidents. A few mentioned signs being tampered with. One article mentioned a man arrested years ago for living illegally in the forest for months at a time, surviving off theft and avoiding detection. He had been released due to lack of evidence tying him to anything worse. The article ended by saying the forest was still open to the public. I have not been camping since, not alone. Not anywhere quiet enough to hear footsteps in the dark. What stays with me is not the fear I felt in the tent, or the cold, or the silence. It is the knowledge that someone was there, close enough to touch me, and chose not to. Whatever reason they had for that choice is something I will never know, and that uncertainty is what still keeps me awake at night. I was tired of noise, tired of people, tired of phones buzzing every few minutes. I picked a spot that wasn't popular, far from any main trail. It was a forest area that allowed camping, but most people avoided it because the terrain was uneven and there was no lake or view worth posting online. That was perfect for me. I parked my car on the side of a dirt road just before sunset. The road looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Deep tire marks were hardened into the ground and weeds grew up through the cracks. The forest started immediately past the road, thick trees packed close together. I grabbed my backpack, locked the car, and started walking in. The air smelled like damp leaves and old wood. It felt heavy, like rain had passed through earlier in the day, even though the sky was clear. I walked for about 40 minutes before I found a spot that felt right. It was a small clearing, not open, but less crowded with trees. The ground was uneven and covered in pine needles and dead leaves. There were no signs of other campers. No fire rings, no trash, no flattened areas. That should have been a good sign. At the time, I thought it meant peace. I set up my tent slowly, making sure everything was tight and secure. I always double-checked the stakes and zippers. The forest was quiet, but not silent. I could hear insects, distant birds settling in, and the wind moving through the branches. Nothing felt wrong yet. I cooked a simple meal on my small stove and ate while sitting on a rock. As the light faded, the forest changed. Shadows stretched and blended together. The trees stopped looking like individual things and started looking like one solid wall. By the time it was fully dark, I was already inside my tent. I used a headlamp to organize my gear. I turned it off and lay there, listening. That's when I noticed how deep the quiet really was. The insect sounds had thinned out. There was no steady noise, just small, random sounds. A leaf falling, a branch snapping somewhere far away. The kind of sounds that make you pay attention even when you don't want to. I tried to sleep. I really did, but my body wouldn't relax. I kept feeling like I needed to listen harder, like I might miss something important if I drifted off. Around what felt like an hour later, I heard footsteps. They were slow and uneven, not like an animal running. They stopped, then started again. Each step was careful, as if whoever or whatever it was didn't want to make noise. The sound circled the clearing, staying just beyond where I could see. I stayed completely still. I told myself it was probably a deer or something similar, but I knew how deer moved. This wasn't that. There was weight behind the steps. The footsteps stopped directly behind my tent. I could hear breathing. Not loud, but close. Close enough that it felt like the air around my tent changed. I held my breath without thinking. Minutes passed. My muscles started to shake from staying tense. Then the breathing moved away. The steps faded back into the trees. I didn't sleep at all after that.
I waited for the first hint of morning light. When it finally came, I felt exhausted and stiff. I stepped out of the tent and checked the ground. There were footprints. Human footprints. Deep ones pressed into the damp soil. They circled my tent slowly, deliberately. Whoever it was had taken their time. I packed up immediately. I didn't eat. I didn't sit down. I just shoved everything into my backpack and left. I walked fast, constantly looking over my shoulder. The forest felt different now. Smaller, closer, like it was watching me. The walk back to the car took longer than it should have. The trail didn't look the same in daylight. Some of the trees looked unfamiliar. I started to panic that I had gone the wrong way. Then I heard movement again. Branches snapping, closer this time. I sped up. My breathing got loud and I hated that. I hated how easy it would be for someone to track me. I finally reached the road and saw my car. Relief hit me so hard it almost made me dizzy. But as I got closer, I noticed something wrong. The dirt around my car was disturbed. There were fresh footprints all around it. Someone had been there recently. I unlocked the car with shaking hands and threw my gear into the back. Before getting in, I checked the back seat and trunk area carefully. Everything looked normal. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment trying to calm down. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, but it wasn't my smell. It was like sweat and dirt, old and sharp. I looked down and saw mud on the floor mat that wasn't there before. I started the car and drove off without thinking. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away. I sat there for a long time just breathing. I checked my car again. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But I knew someone had been close. Too close.
When I got home, I washed everything. My clothes, my gear, even the backpack. But I couldn't wash away the feeling. The memory of the breathing behind my tent stuck with me. The way the footsteps moved slowly, like they knew exactly where I was. I reported it to the Park Service a few days later. They said they'd look into it. They didn't seem surprised. That bothered me more than anything else. I still camp, but never alone anymore, and never in places that are too quiet. Silence like that isn't peaceful. It's empty space where anything can hide, and where someone can stand just inches away from you in the dark, waiting, while you lie there pretending not to breathe. I went camping alone in a stretch of public land that sat far from any town. It was late fall, the kind of season where the days feel calm and the nights turn sharp and cold. I chose the place because it looked empty on the map. One dirt road, a small clearing near a dry riverbed, and miles of trees on all sides. I wanted quiet. I wanted to sleep without traffic noise and without people nearby. I told myself that being alone would make everything simpler. The drive out took hours. The paved road turned into gravel, then into packed dirt. The trees closed in, tall and thin, with bare branches scratching the sky. I kept my windows down to stay awake and smelled wet leaves and old soil. The sun was already low when I parked. There were no other cars, no trash, no fire rings that looked fresh. The place felt unused, which I liked at first. I set up my tent slowly, making sure the ground was flat. The soil was dark and soft, still holding moisture from recent rain. My boots sank a little with every step. I noticed footprints near the edge of the clearing, half washed away, not fresh enough to look sharp, but not old enough to be gone. I assumed someone had camped there weeks ago. I did not think about it more than that. I collected wood from the ground and built a small fire. The light from it barely pushed back the darkness. The trees swallowed the glow. I cooked a simple meal and ate sitting on a rock, listening to the forest settle. Birds stopped moving. Wind came and went in slow waves. Every sound felt louder because nothing else was there to cover it. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast. I zipped my jacket tight and fed the fire until it burned steady. I checked my phone. There was no signal, which I expected. I put it away and focused on the fire until my eyes felt heavy. Before sleeping, I walked a short circle around my camp with my flashlight. The beam caught tree trunks, rocks, and low brush. Nothing moved. The forest looked still, like it was holding its breath. I went into my tent and lay on my back, staring at the dark fabric above me. The fire crackled outside. I could smell smoke mixed with damp leaves. Sleep came in short pieces. I woke up often, each time feeling like something had changed, even though I could not say what it was. At some point into night, I woke up to a sound of movement. It was not loud. It was not fast. It sounded like careful steps on soft ground. The noise came from beyond the fire, deeper in the trees. I held my breath and listened. The steps stopped. Wind moved the branches. I told myself it was an animal and tried to relax. Minutes passed. Then the sound returned, closer this time. Slow, heavy, not the light rush of deer or the random pattern of small animals. These steps had rhythm. They paused, then continued. I lay still, my body tense, my ears focused on every sound. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. The light outside my tent was weak. I reached for my flashlight, but did not turn it on. I did not want to draw attention. The steps circled the clearing, staying just outside the firelight. Leaves shifted. Twigs snapped under careful weight. I waited for the sound to move away. It did not. It stopped again, this time close enough that I could hear breathing. Slow, controlled, like someone trying not to be heard. My chest tightened. I told myself it could still be an animal, but I knew animals did not move like that. I stayed frozen until the sounds faded back into the trees. When they finally stopped, I did not feel relief. I felt watched. Sleep did not return. I lay there until the sky lightened just enough to show the shape of the tent walls. At dawn, I crawled out and stood stiff and sore. The clearing looked normal. The fire was dead. Mist hung low over the ground. I walked the same circle as before, this time in full light. Near the edge of the trees, I saw fresh footprints pressed deep into the wet soil. They were large and clear. They had not been there when I arrived. The prints formed a slow loop around my camp. My stomach dropped. I packed my gear faster than I ever had before. I did not eat. I did not make coffee. I kept looking into the trees while stuffing my tent and sleeping bag into my pack. Every sound made me flinch. Before leaving, I noticed something else. A long stick had been placed near my fire pit, not burned, not random. It looked set down on purpose, pointing toward my tent. I did not touch it. I left it where it was. I loaded my car and drove out, gripping the wheel too hard. I told myself I was done with that place. I told myself I was safe once the road widened and the trees thinned. An hour into the drive, my tire blew. The sound was sharp and violent. The car jerked, and I fought to keep it straight. I managed to pull over on a narrow shoulder. Trees pressed close on both sides. The road was empty in both directions. I stepped out and saw the damage. The tire was shredded. The spare was in the trunk, but the jack was old and stiff. As I worked, I felt exposed. The forest felt closer here. Thicker, darker, even in daylight. Halfway through changing the tire, I heard movement again.
This time it came from behind me. Slow steps on leaves. I did not turn around right away.
My hands shook as I tightened the lock nuts.
The steps stopped when I froze. He stood there, breathing hard, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I forced myself to turn. No one stood there. The trees looked the same as they always had, but the ground near the edge of the road showed marks, fresh ones, the same size as before. I finished changing the tire with shaking hands and got back into the car. I did not look back as I drove away. Hours later, I reached a town and stopped at a gas station. Under the bright lights, I finally felt my body loosen. I checked my car and noticed deep scratches along the back bumper, thin lines through dried mud. They had not been there before.
I went home and tried to forget the trip.
Sleep came easier again. Weeks passed. Then I saw a short article online about a missing hiker found dead near a remote camping area. The photo showed the same dirt road I had driven, the same clearing by the dry riverbed. The report mentioned signs of someone watching campsites, waiting, moving at night. No suspect was named, no cause explained in detail. I never went back to that place.
I never camped alone again. Even now, years later, when I hear slow steps on leaves, my body reacts before my mind does. I know what it feels like to be studied in the dark, to be measured and spared for reasons I will never understand. The ending was clear to me long before I read the article. I was not alone out there. I was just lucky enough to leave before luck ran out. I was driving home late at night on a road I had taken hundreds of times before. That was part of why I didn't think twice about it. It was a long, straight stretch that cut through empty land, old farms, and patches of trees that felt thicker the farther you went. No street lights, just my headlights, the sound of tires on dry asphalt, and the quiet hum of the engine. I remember the air inside the car feeling stale, like it had been sitting too long, even though the windows were cracked. I wasn't tired enough to be drifting, but I wasn't fully alert either. My mind was doing that thing where it jumps between random thoughts without landing on any of them. The radio had gone quiet a few miles back, turning into static, and I never bothered to change it. The static felt better than silence, like proof that something else existed beyond the road in front of me. About 20 minutes in, I noticed a car behind me. At first it was just a pair of lights far back, nothing unusual. Cars were rare on that road at night, but not impossible. It kept my speed steady. The lights stayed there, not gaining, not falling behind, just sitting at the same distance, like they were tied to me. The road bent slightly to the left, then straightened again. When I checked my mirror, the lights were still there. I remember feeling a small, sharp pinch of unease in my stomach. Not fear exactly, just awareness. I told myself I was overthinking it, the same way people always do before something goes wrong. A few minutes later, I slowed down a bit to see what would happen. The lights slowed too. That's when my chest tightened. It wasn't normal behavior. Anyone else would have passed or fallen back. This car didn't. It matched me perfectly, like a shadow. I sped up, not a lot, just enough to test it. The engine whined slightly, and the road noise changed. The lights behind me grew brighter almost immediately. Closer. Not close enough to be tailgating, but closer than before. My hands tightened on the wheel without me realizing it. I told myself maybe they were just headed the same way. Maybe they were cautious or distracted or just weird. That road had a way of messing with your head at night. Everything felt bigger, heavier. The trees leaned in, their branches catching the edge of my headlights and vanishing again. Then my phone lost signal. I noticed because the small icon at the top went blank. No bars. I hadn't been planning to call anyone, but seeing that empty space made me feel cut off, like the road had closed behind me without making a sound. I tried slowing again, more noticeably this time. The car behind slowed exactly with me. I could see the shape of it now, barely. A dark sedan, older, the kind that blends into the night. No visible damage, no identifying marks, just headlights and a dark outline. I thought about pulling over, just to end whatever this was, but the idea of stopping on that empty road with nothing around, and that car stopping too, made my skin crawl. I kept driving. The asphalt cracked more, the painted lines faded until they were barely there. The road narrowed after a while. This part always made me uneasy, even during the day. At night it felt abandoned, like it had been forgotten by everyone except me and the car behind me. I checked the mirror again and saw something new. The car's headlights flickered for a moment, then steadied. It wasn't dramatic, but it caught my attention. Old wiring, maybe, or something else. My thoughts started racing, filling the silence with worst-case ideas I didn't want to acknowledge. I took a turn I didn't need to take, a side road that cut through trees and eventually looped back to the main road a few miles later. I hadn't planned it. I just did it, my turn signal clicking loud in the quiet car. For half a second, I hoped the car would keep going straight. It didn't. The headlights followed me onto the side road. The pavement was worse here, uneven and patched, and my car bounced slightly as I drove. The trees closed in tighter, their shadows thick and heavy. There were no houses, no lights, no signs, just road and forest. My breathing had changed by then. Shorter, faster. I became very aware of my body, of the way my shoulders were tense, my jaw clenched. I tried to calm myself by focusing on small details, the way the steering wheel felt under my palms, the faint smell of dust and old fabric inside the car.
I slowed down again, almost to a crawl. The car behind slowed too. The headlights stayed fixed on me, lighting up my back window and filling the car with a pale glow. I felt exposed, like I was being examined. The engine roared, louder than it had been all night. Then I sped up hard. The speedometer climbed. The road blurred slightly at the edges. My car wasn't built for this, and I knew it. Every bump felt sharper, more dangerous. The trees rushed past like dark walls. The car behind me didn't fall back. It stayed with me, its headlights unwavering, as if speed didn't matter to it at all. That was when real fear set in. Cold, heavy, and deep. The kind that doesn't make you scream or panic right away. The kind that settles in and tells you something is very wrong. I saw a shape ahead on the road and instinctively slowed, my heart jumping. It was just debris, broken branches and old leaves scattered across the asphalt. I swerved slightly to avoid the worst of it, tires crunching softly. When I checked the mirror again, the car was closer than it had ever been. Too close. I could see more detail now. A dent under hood, a cracked headlight cover. The windshield looked dark, like the inside was swallowing the light instead of reflecting it. I couldn't see anyone inside. My thoughts spiraled.
I tried to remember the last time I'd seen another person.
The last place with lights. It felt like hours ago, even though it couldn't have been that long.
The side road finally ended, merging back onto the main road. I felt a brief surge of relief, like returning to something familiar would make this stop.
It didn't.
The car stayed with me, just as steady, just as close. I saw a pull-off ahead, a wide patch of gravel where trucks sometimes stopped. Without thinking too much, I slowed and turned into it. The gravel crunched loudly under my tires, the sound echoing in the open space. For a moment, the road was empty behind me. I stopped the car, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I sat there, listening, every sense stretched thin. The night felt thicker here, heavier. Then the headlights appeared at the edge of the pull-off. The car rolled in slowly, deliberately, its lights washing over my car, the gravel, the trees. It stopped a short distance away, angled slightly toward me. The engine idled, a low, steady sound. I waited. I don't know what I was waiting for. Movement, something, anything, but nothing happened. No doors opened, no lights turned off. The car just sat there, watching. Time stretched. My thoughts dulled, fear turning into a numb pressure behind my eyes. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't about speed or direction. It had followed me because it wanted to, not because it had to. After what felt like forever, the headlights flicked off. The sudden darkness was worse than the light. I could barely see anything now, just vague shapes. My own reflection stared back at me from the windshield, pale and tense. The engine of the other car stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there frozen, listening to the night.
No footsteps, no sounds. Then slowly, the engine started again. Just silence, so complete it rang in my ears. The headlights came back on, sweeping past me as the car turned.
Gravel crunched once more, then faded as the car pulled back onto the road and drove away. The red taillights shrank into the distance until they were gone.
I sat there for several minutes after that, my body refusing to relax.
When I finally started my car again, my hands were still shaking. I waited until the road was completely empty before pulling out and driving the rest of the way home. I didn't see the car again. I made it home without incident, parked, and went inside. But even now, long after that night, I think about it whenever I drive that road. I don't know who was in that car or why they followed me or what would have happened if I'd stopped earlier or tried to confront it. All I know is that something chose to follow me that night, stayed with me as long as it wanted to, and left on its own terms. And that scares me more than any clear answer ever could. I went camping alone because I wanted quiet. I had been tired for months, tired of noise, tired of people, tired of the city always pushing in on me. I chose a public forest far from towns, a place with old trees, rough trails, and a river that cut through the valley. I told myself it was safe because it was marked land, not private, and people camped there sometimes. Still, I picked a spot far from the main trail. I wanted to be completely alone. The drive took most of the day. The road slowly turned from smooth pavement to cracked asphalt, then to dirt and gravel. My phone lost signal hours before I arrived. I remember noticing that and feeling fine about it. I even felt good. No messages, no calls, no updates, just trees and sky. I parked near a rusted metal gate that blocked vehicles from going farther in. From there, I hiked with my pack for almost 2 hours, following a thin trail that was barely visible in some places. Fallen leaves covered most of it, and branches scratched my arms as I passed. I chose a flat spot near the river, but far enough that the water would not rise at night. The ground was soft with pine needles. The air smelled wet and cold. I set up my tent carefully, making sure the stakes were deep. I laid out my sleeping bag, arranged my food in sealed bags, and hung them from a tree like I always did. Everything felt normal, too normal. As evening came, the forest changed. The light dropped fast, like someone turned a switch. The trees blocked the sky, and shadows stretched everywhere. I cooked a simple meal and ate slowly, listening to the river and the wind. Every sound seemed louder without anything else around. A stick snapping far away made my head turn fast. Leaves shifting made my stomach tighten. I told myself it was just animals, just the forest doing what it always does. When it got dark all at once. No city glow, no distant lights, just black. I used my headlamp to move around, checking my gear again even though I knew it was fine. I remember feeling watched, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet pressure in my chest, like something was off but I could not name it. I went into my tent early. The cold crept in fast and the ground pulled heat from my body. I lay there listening. The river stayed steady. The wind moved the trees. Somewhere far away, something heavy moved through brush, not running, not light. Slow and careful, I held still and waited. The sound passed and faded. Hours later, I woke up suddenly. I did not know why at first. Everything was silent. No wind. No river sound. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. Then I heard footsteps. They were slow and uneven, coming from the direction of the trail. Not animal steps. Too steady. Too spaced out. I stayed frozen. Barely breathing. The steps stopped. I told myself it was someone else camping, maybe lost, maybe passing through. But my spot was hidden. You would not find it by accident. The steps started again, closer this time, crushing leaves and snapping small branches. My heart was beating so hard I felt it in my throat. I reached for my knife and held it tight, even though I knew it would not help much. A shadow passed over the thin wall of my tent, tall, wider than it should have been. It moved slowly, like whoever it was looking at the tent, studying it. I could hear breathing outside, deep and rough. It stopped right next to my head. I stayed completely still. I did not move an inch. I did not make a sound. After a long time, the shadow moved away. The footsteps retreated, slow and careful again. I waited. Minutes passed. Then more movement, this time farther off. Branches breaking, leaves shifting. The sounds faded into the forest. I did not sleep after that. I sat there until the sky started to lighten, watching the tent walls turn from black to gray. When morning came, the forest sounds returned like nothing had happened. Birds called. The river flowed again. Everything looked normal, too normal. I stepped out of the tent and saw footprints. Human footprints. Large boots pressed deep into the soft ground around my camp. They circled the tent. They stopped near where my head had been. I felt sick looking at them. I checked my food. One bag was gone. The rope had been cut clean. I packed as fast as I could. My hands shook the whole time. I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see someone watching me. I did not eat. I did not rest. I just packed and left. On the hike back, I noticed more signs, broken branches that had not been there before, bits of plastic tied to trees like markers, a place where the ground was flattened like someone had been staying there for a while.
I realized I had camped near someone who did not want to be found. Halfway back to the gate, I heard movement behind me, slow steps again. Not trying to hide this time, I did not turn around, I just walked faster. The steps matched my pace for a while, then stopped. I did not stop walking until I reached my car. When I got home, I washed everything. I checked my gear over and over. I reported what I saw, but nothing came of it. No one followed up. No one called. Weeks later, I read a small local article about a man arrested miles away, living deep in the forest, stealing from camps, watching people, waiting for them to leave. They found knives, ropes, and bags of food. They did not say how long he had been there. I stopped camping alone after that, not because of fear of animals or weather, but because of how quiet the forest can be when someone else is out there, watching, waiting, and choosing not to be seen.
I was working the night shift at a freight train yard on the edge of the city. It was one of those places most people never think about. Long rows of rusted tracks, idle engines breathing out heat, stacks of containers like metal buildings with no windows. The job sounded simple on paper. Walk the yard, check seals, note damage, report anything off. No excitement, no danger. That was the lie I believed before that night. I arrived a little before midnight. The air smelled like oil, wet steel, and old rain. Floodlights stood on tall poles, but they did not light everything. They made bright circles and left deep shadows in between. The dark parts felt heavy, like they were pressing down. The ground was gravel and uneven. Every step made noise, which meant I could hear myself, but also knew anyone else would hear me too. The yard was bigger than it looked during the day. At night, it felt endless. Rows of cars stretched out until they faded into black. Some were boxcars, some tankers, some flatbeds carrying machines wrapped in dirty plastic. The engines were shut down, but they still clicked and popped as they cooled. Those sounds never stop. They sound like footsteps if you are tired enough. I started my usual route, following the same path I had walked dozens of times before. Clipboard in hand, flashlight sweeping low. The beam showed chipped paint, old graffiti, bent ladders, cracked seals. Normal things. My boots kicked small stones and the sound echoed more than it should have. There was no wind, but I kept feeling cold air on the back of my neck. About an hour in, I noticed something small that felt wrong. One of the container seals was hanging loose. Not broken clean, but bent and twisted like it had been worked on slowly. That did not make sense. Theft usually leaves rough damage. This looked careful. I wrote it down and moved on, telling myself it was probably old and I had missed it before. As I kept walking, the yard felt quieter than usual. The normal metal noises seemed farther apart. Even the city hum in the distance felt muted. My flashlight battery flickered once, then steadied. I tapped it against my leg, annoyed more than worried. I had spare batteries in my bag. I reached a section near the back of the yard that was rarely used. Older cars sat there, some marked for repair, some waiting for parts that might never come. The floodlights were spaced farther apart here. Shadows filled most of the space. I slowed down, not because I was scared yet, but because something in my body told me to. That was when I noticed footprints. They were fresh. Clear prints in the dust between the tracks. Not boot prints like mine, but sneakers. The pattern was sharp, not washed away by time or weather. They went between two rows of cars and disappeared into darkness. My first thought was trespassers. It happened sometimes, people looking for scrap or a place to hide. Still, the yard was fenced and locked. Getting in was not easy. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the ground. The silence felt thicker. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. I reminded myself that I was not paid to confront anyone. Just report and leave. I wrote down the location, took a quick photo with my phone, and turned back toward the main path. That was when I heard movement. It was not footsteps exactly, more like fabric brushing metal, slow and controlled. It came from the row of cars to my right. It froze without thinking. My flashlight beam shook slightly as I aimed it toward the sound. The light caught the side of a boxcar, then slid along the ground. Nothing was there. I waited.
The yard did not return to normal. The silence stayed broken, like something was holding its breath. I kept walking, faster now, trying to reach a brighter area. My heart was beating hard, and I hated how loud it felt. I told myself over and over that there was a logical reason for everything. Animals got in sometimes. Wind moved loose parts. My mind kept offering excuses, but my body did not believe them. As I passed another row of cars, I noticed more signs. A tarp partially pulled back, a door not fully closed, scratches on fresh paint. All of it pointed to someone being there recently, someone moving around with purpose. I made the mistake of cutting through a narrow gap between two long tankers. It saved time, but the space was tight. The metal walls rose on both sides, blocking most of the light. Halfway through, the smell changed. It was sharper, sweat mixed with something sour, human. My flashlight flickered again, worse this time. The beam dimmed, then went out completely. I stood in total darkness, trapped between two silent machines. My hands shook as I reached into my bag for batteries. The gravel shifted somewhere ahead of me. One step, then another, slow, careful, close. I dropped the batteries. They rolled across the ground, clicking softly as they hit metal. That sound felt like screaming. I crouched without thinking, pressing myself against the cold side of the tanker. My breath came fast and shallow. I forced myself to stay still. The steps stopped. I do not know how long I stayed like that. Seconds felt like minutes. My legs burned from holding the position. My mind filled the dark with images I did not want. I could smell that sharp human scent again, stronger now. Whoever it was, they were close enough for me to notice details. Then the steps moved away, slow and steady, fading back into the yard. I waited longer than felt safe. When I finally stood up, my legs almost gave out. I got the flashlight working again with shaking hands. The light felt weak but better than nothing. I did not go back the way I came. I moved forward, pushing through the rest of the gap and into open space.
I headed straight for the main office building. I did not check anything else. I did not look back. Every shadow felt like it was moving. Every sound made my stomach drop. I reached the building and locked myself inside, bolting the door harder than needed. From the window, I could see part of the yard. The floodlights buzzed overhead. Everything looked normal again. Too normal. I watched for movement, but nothing stood out. The tracks were empty. The cars were still. I reported everything as soon as my hands stopped shaking enough to write. The loose seals, the footprints, the sounds. I left out how close it felt, because I did not have proof for that part. Paper does not care about fear. The rest of the shift passed slowly. Security came through later and found signs of someone living inside one of the old boxcars. Blankets, food wrappers, a pile of tools. No one was there anymore. They had slipped out the same way they came in. When my shift ended, the sun was just starting to rise. The yard looked harmless in the early light. Just steel and gravel and quiet work waiting to be done. Anyone looking at it then would never believe how it felt hours earlier. I did not quit that day. I needed the money, but I never walked the back section alone again. I stayed in the light. I listened harder. And every night, when the metal clicked and cooled and the shadows stretched long across the tracks, I remembered how close someone had been without me seeing them. The fear did not come from the dark itself. It came from knowing that someone could be right there, breathing the same air, choosing when to move and when to stay still, while I stood exposed with nothing but a weak light and my own footsteps to give me away. That knowledge stayed with me long after the yard returned to daylight, and it still follows me whenever I walk alone at night. I took the night shift at the storage facility because it paid a little more and because I thought it would be easy. The place was far from town, sitting between a highway and a stretch of empty land that used to be farms. During the day, it looked boring and harmless. Long rows of metal buildings, gravel roads, a small office, and a gate that never really closed right. At night, it felt like something else entirely. My job was simple. Sit in the office, watch the cameras, walk the property once every hour, and write down anything strange. Most nights, nothing happened. Wind would push trash across the gravel. Rats would move behind the units. Sometimes headlights from the highway would flash across the fence. That was it. This night started normal. I parked near the office, shut the car off, and sat there for a second like I always did. The silence hit immediately. No city noise. No people. Just the low hum of the highway far away and the buzzing lights above the units. I grabbed my keys, flashlight, and notebook and went inside. The office smelled like dust and old coffee. The cameras were already on. Every row showed up in black and white. Long, straight paths between storage units, all looking the same. I signed in, poured some stale coffee, and sat down. About an hour passed without anything happening. I did my first walk. Gravel crunched under my boots. The air was cold and dry. The lights made hard shadows that didn't move until I did. Every unit door was shut, just like it should be. I checked locks, looked for damage, and went back inside. The second hour was when things started to feel off. On one of the camera screens, I noticed a door that looked slightly different. It wasn't wide open, but it wasn't fully shut either, just enough to make a thin black line at the bottom. I stared at it longer than I should have. I couldn't remember seeing it like that earlier. I rewound the footage. Earlier that night, the door was closed all the way. I checked the timestamp. It had changed about 10 minutes ago. No vehicle came in. No person showed up on camera. The door just wasn't shut anymore. I told myself it was probably a bad latch or the wind. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and went out. Walking that row felt longer than usual. Every step sounded too loud. When I reached the unit, the door was indeed cracked open. The lock was hanging loose, not broken, just undone. Inside was dark. I shined my light in. It was empty except for some old boxes pushed against the wall. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. I shut the door, locked it, tugged on it to make sure, and wrote it down. I didn't like it, but it wasn't proof of anything serious. Back in the office, I tried to relax. I scrolled on my phone, watched the screens, and drank more coffee. About 30 minutes later, I noticed something else. A different camera now showed a dark shape between two units. At first, I thought it was a shadow, but shadows didn't stay still like that. I zoomed in. The picture got grainy, but I could tell it was low to the ground. Too wide to be a person standing. Too tall to be an animal I knew. It looked like someone crouching or bending forward. I watched for movement. I tourniquet and nothing happened. The shape stayed there, perfectly still. I wound again. The shape wasn't there 5 minutes earlier. It just appeared between frames. I felt my stomach tighten. I waited another minute. Still nothing. I didn't want to go out again, but it was my job. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air felt heavier. The wind had died down completely. Even the highway noise felt muted. I walked towards the row from the camera, trying not to rush but failing anyway. My light shook slightly in my hand. When I reached the spot, there was nothing there. No person. No animal, just gravel and metal walls. I checked around the units, behind corners, near the fence. Nothing. As I turned back, I noticed footprints in the gravel. They weren't mine. They were deeper, like someone heavier had walked there recently. They didn't follow a straight path. They wandered, stopped, turned, and circled the same area. The footprints ended suddenly near the fence. No tracks leading out. Just an empty space like whoever made them had vanished into thin air. That didn't make sense, and I hated that. I went back inside and locked the office door, even though it wasn't required. I kept watching the cameras. My heart wouldn't slow down. Another hour passed. Nothing moved. I started to think maybe stress was messing with my head. Then I saw the gate camera flicker, just for a second. When it came back, the gate was open. I knew for a fact I hadn't opened it. No car had come in. No alarm went off. The gate was just open, wide enough for someone to walk through. I stared at the screen, hoping it would close again. It didn't. I felt a strong urge to leave, to get in my car and drive away, but I also knew leaving the gate open could get me fired. I told myself I would close it quickly and come back. Outside, the lights near the gate were dimmer. Bugs flew around them, hitting the glass again and again. The gate creaked as I pulled it shut. The sound echoed across the property. I hated how far it carried.
As I locked it, I had that feeling people talk about, the feeling of being watched. My back felt exposed. My skin prickled. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't want to see someone standing there. When I finally looked, no one was there, but something had changed. The storage units farther down the property were dark. Their lights were out. That shouldn't have happened. They were on a separate line. A power issue could explain one or two lights, but not a whole section. I walked closer. With every step, the dark seemed thicker. My flashlight beam felt weak, like it couldn't push far enough. The silence was complete. No bugs, no wind, no bugs, distant cars.
Then I heard movement. It wasn't footsteps. It was slower, a dragging sound, like something being pulled across gravel. It came from inside the dark area. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs didn't listen right away. The sound stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Then one of the unit doors in the dark began to lift. It didn't slam or rattle. It rose slowly, smoothly, like someone taking their time. The sound of metal on metal scraped through the quiet. I didn't see a person. I didn't see anything step out, but the door kept rising until it was fully open. That was enough. I turned and ran. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about my job. I ran straight to my car, dropped my keys twice, finally got the door open, and jumped in. As I started the engine, I looked up at the cameras mounted on the poles. Every single one was pointed slightly downward now, aimed at the ground instead of the rows. I sped out of there, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't slow down until I reached the highway. My hands shook the whole drive home. The next day, I didn't go back. It quit over the phone. They told me nothing unusual had been reported after I left. No broken units, no power outage, no open gates. A week later, I drove past the facility in daylight. It looked normal, clean, quiet, boring. But I noticed something near the fence as I passed by. Footprints in the dirt, deep and uneven, leading right up to the road and stopping there. I never took another night job after that. Some places don't need ghosts to be wrong. Some places are just waiting for someone to be alone long enough to notice.